I was 33 years old, a drifter hunter with nothing but a gray horse named Ash, a long bow, a hunting knife, and a worn leather pouch holding salt, flour, and a few lengths of snare wire. No fixed home, no family, nothing to tie me down. After the last border war where I had killed men simply to stay alive, I left the crowded human lands behind. Since then I kept to the forests, the mountain passes, and the old game trails that most people had forgotten. I crossed the Ashrock Gorge that day, a barren valley squeezed between human territory and the high Orc plateaus. The land was almost dead, gray stone walls rising like broken teeth, seasonal streams reduced to cracked mud, thorny scrub, and very little game. Wind whistled through the narrow crevices like something grieving. Few travelers came this way, and fewer still stayed. But in the middle of that emptiness I saw a thin column of smoke. Not the thick plume of a large campfire, just a low, careful wisp, deliberately kept close to the ground so it would not be spotted from the ridges above. Someone was trying hard not to be found. I tied Ash under a dead pine, left my bow slung across my back, and went down on foot. I kept my hands open and visible, stepping slowly. If anyone was hiding in that gorge, I did not want them to think I had come to hunt them. Closer now, I saw a ring of stones for a fire, a low shelter built from stitched animal hides, dry branches, and clay. A few rabbit snares, small bones laid out neatly to dry, and a water skin patched with tree resin. The camp was not new. Whoever lived here had been here for years. From behind a thicket of thorns she stepped out. She was an Orc girl, thin and hard as winter wire. Her black hair hung in tangled ropes bound by a strip of leather. Her clothes were many layers of patched hide and cloth. In her right hand she held a bone knife, the edge worn but still sharp. She did not charge. She did not speak. She simply stood there and looked at me the way a cornered wild thing looks at the hunter who has finally found its den. There was fear in her yellow eyes, yes, but something heavier too. The exhaustion of someone who had waited far too long to trust any living soul. I stopped 10 paces away. Slowly I set down an old wool blanket I kept in my saddlebag, a piece of dried venison, and my spare water skin. Then I stepped back. "I'm not here to take anything from you," I said, keeping my voice low and even. "I only saw the smoke. If you don't want me here, I'll leave right now." She did not answer, but the fingers around the bone knife eased their grip just a fraction. I turned, walked back up the slope, and mounted Ash. I rode only half a mile down the gorge before I pitched my small tent in the lee of a boulder. I told myself I would watch for one night only. Stone wolves hunted these passes, and slave takers sometimes rode the border trails looking for easy prey. A lone girl could not survive forever in a place like this. That night, I sat by my own small fire and listened to the wind. I did not sleep much. Near dawn I saw movement. She came out of her shelter, glanced once toward my distant camp, then took the water skin and the meat I had left. She cut the dried venison in half with her bone knife, ate one piece slowly and placed the other back exactly where I had set it. She drank from the skin, then set it down too. It was clear she would accept what I offered, but she would not be in my debt. I understood that kind of pride. I had lived inside it for years. The next morning, beside the remaining half of the meat, lay a small green stone no larger than a walnut. It was nothing precious, just a smooth river pebble the color of deep moss. She had placed it there deliberately. It was not a gift of value, it was only a sign. I saw you, and from that small green stone, between me and the lonely Orc girl who had lived alone in the gorge for years, a very small bridge began to form. The days that followed were quiet ones, measured in small offerings left on stones and the slow unwinding of fear. I never entered her camp. Each morning I walked to the edge of the clearing, set down something useful, and walked away again. A length of good snare wire, a bone needle I had carved myself, a small pouch of salt, a handful of arrows that were still straight enough to fly true. I left them where she could see them from her shelter, then retreated to my own fire half a mile down the gorge. She answered in the same silent language, A cluster of late-season berries wrapped in a broad leaf, a handful of medicinal roots still damp with earth. A strip of rabbit skin scraped clean and soft, sometimes nothing more than a fresh mark scratched into a flat stone, a simple line that might have been a wave or a mountain ridge. I never knew exactly what it meant, only that she was answering. We still did not speak. We were not friends. We were two wary animals testing whether the other would bite. On the 5th morning, I was kneeling by the thin stream, patching a tear in Ash's reins with a strip of hide, when I heard footsteps behind me. I kept my hands visible on the leather and did not turn too quickly. She stood 10 paces away. The bone knife was still in her grip, but it pointed at the ground. Her yellow eyes studied me the way a hunter studies unfamiliar tracks. "Raella," she said. The word came out rough, as if her throat had grown unused to shaping human speech. I repeated it carefully, the way I had heard it. "Raella." Then I touched my own chest. Called her. She looked at me for a long time, as though weighing whether the name was worth remembering. Finally, she gave a single nod and walked back into the thorns. That night she built a small fire in the open, not the careful, hidden signal flame she had kept for years, but a real one that threw light and warmth. I saw the glow from my own camp and understood the invitation. I walked up slowly, carrying nothing but the blanket I had left her on the first day. She did not tell me to leave. We sat on opposite sides of the flames. She spoke in pieces, feeding the fire with dry sticks as she fed me fragments of her life. She had belonged to the Black Wolf Eye clan. When she was 14, the camp was attacked at dawn by human soldiers and a band of orc traders who had sold their own people for coin and safe passage. The adults had driven the children into the high passes with orders to run and keep running. In the panic, she became separated. She doubled back when the fighting sounds faded, certain the clan would regroup at the old meeting place. One day became 1 week became 1 year, then many years. No one ever came. I asked the question that had been burning in me since the first morning. "Why do you still wait here?" Raella stared into the flames. The firelight painted shifting shadows across the tribal scars on her forearms. "If they are alive," she said, "they will remember the old road. If I leave, they will never find me." It was not hope I heard in her voice. It was a chain. She had kept the fire burning for ghosts who might never return, because leaving would mean admitting they were gone. I did not offer empty comfort. Instead, I gave her a piece of my own past, the part I could stand to speak aloud. "I was a soldier on the border once," I said. "I did things that still keep me awake some nights. When the war ended, I walked away from every banner and every lord. Now I hunt alone. I killed orcs. I saved orcs. I killed men. I saved men. War turns people into things that are hard to name." Her fingers tightened around the bone knife. She did not forgive me, but she also did not stand up and walk back into her shelter. That was something. In the days that followed, she began to watch me more openly. She noticed I never touched anything that belonged to her unless she offered it. I never stepped past the circle of stones around her fire unless she nodded. I asked few questions and never pressed for answers. I brought meat when I had extra and took nothing in return except the small gifts she chose to leave. To Raella, these small refusals were louder than any promise. One night the sky opened without warning. Rain hammered the gorge in sheets. I heard the wind tear at her shelter and the sound of hides ripping. I grabbed a coil of rope and ran through the downpour. She stood outside the collapsing lean-to, soaked to the bone, knife in hand, trying to hold the frame together with one arm. I did not ask permission. I simply began lashing new supports, driving stakes deep, stretching fresh hide over the worst tears. She worked beside me, silent, water streaming down her face. When the shelter was secure again, we were both drenched and breathing hard. She looked at the fire inside, now sputtering but still alive, then at me. "You can sit near the flames," she said. It was not much. To anyone else, it would have sounded ordinary. To Raella, it was the first door she had ever opened. That night, we sat on opposite sides of the small fire while the storm roared outside. Steam rose from our wet clothes. She kept glancing toward the dark mouth of the gorge where she had waited for her people every single night for more than half her life. But for the first time she was not sitting there alone, and neither was I. The days settled into a rhythm neither of us had planned, but both of us accepted. We began sharing the gorge the way two survivors share a single small boat. I hunted larger game when the wind was right, mountain goats and the occasional deer that wandered down from the high ridges. Rayla set her fine snares for rabbits and ground birds, her fingers quick and patient in ways mine never were. I repaired the roof of her shelter with fresh hides and stronger saplings. She showed me where to dig for the bitter roots that grew under flat stones and how to crush them into a paste that kept meat from spoiling. I gave her my spare steel knife, the one with the good edge. She taught me how to dry strips of venison over low smoke without wasting fuel. We never called each other partners. We never spoke of tomorrow. But every task slowly became ours. Rayla stopped building the tall signal fire she had kept burning every night for years. Some evenings she let the flames stay small and low. Other nights she let the fire die completely, and we sat together in the dark, listening to the wind move through the stones. I noticed the change but said nothing. That fire had been her promise to the people who never came back. Only she could decide when to let it go. One quiet evening she asked the question I had been waiting for. "You will leave one day?" I looked across the low flames at her. The firelight caught on the thin scars that crossed her forearms and the sharper lines of hunger that still lingered on her face. "Not yet," I answered. She studied me the way she had studied every gift I left on the rocks, carefully, distrustfully. Travelers always say, "Not yet." Then one morning their tracks point away and they are gone. I thought about the lie I could give her, the easy promise that would cost me nothing. Instead, I told her the truth I could manage. "If I go, I will tell you first. I will not disappear while you sleep." She turned the bone knife slowly in her hands, considering my words as if they were something sharp she might cut herself on. For Rayla, a simple promise of honesty carried more weight than any vow of forever. She had lost her entire clan without warning. My small honesty was something she could hold. 3 afternoons later, the world outside the gorge reminded us it had not forgotten the thin smoke that still sometimes rose between the stones. I was skinning a small deer near the stream when I saw dust rising along the upper ridge. 3 riders coming down the narrow trail, a border patrolman in faded surcoat, and 2 bounty hunters whose armor was more rust than steel. Their horses picked their way carefully over the loose scree. They were looking for something. I gave the low whistle Rayla and I had worked out, 2 short notes that meant danger. She melted into the cleft of rock behind her shelter without a sound. I kept working, knife steady, as if I had nothing to hide. The riders reached the bottom of the gorge and reined in a dozen paces from my camp. The patrolman, a hard-faced man with a sergeant's stripe on his sleeve, scanned the ground, the shelter, the drying racks. "Smoke was seen from the ridge 2 days running," he said. "Who keeps a fire in this dead place?" I wiped the knife on my thigh and answered without looking up. "I do. Good hunting here if you know where to look." One of the bounty hunters leaned forward in his saddle. His eyes moved over the smaller footprints in the soft earth near the stream, footprints that were clearly not mine. "There's talk of a lone orc female living somewhere in these passes," he said. "Green skin, black hair, about so tall. Seen any sign?" I kept my voice flat. "Stories out here outnumber the rabbits. Most of them are just as thin." The sergeant's gaze narrowed. "If you're hiding an enemy of the realm, the rope waits for you same as for her." I stood slowly, meeting his eyes. "I hunt meat. I dry it. I sell it in the border villages when I need salt and thread, that's all." They dismounted anyway and walked the camp. They poked at the shelter, kicked over a few drying racks, studied the prints. I held my breath and kept my hands loose at my sides. Rayla remained perfectly still in the rocks behind them. After long minutes, the sergeant spat into the dust. "Keep your eyes open, Hunter. If you see the orc, bring her in. There's silver for her head and none for the man who hides her." I said nothing. They mounted and rode back up the trail, dust trailing behind them like a warning. Only when the sound of hooves had faded completely did Rayla step out of the cleft. Her face was calm, but I saw the tremor in her fingers as she gripped the bone knife. She walked straight to me. "Why didn't you tell them?" I looked at the place where the riders had stood. "Because they didn't ask for your name, they asked for prey." She stared at me for a long time. Then without a word she knelt and laid her bone knife on the flat stone between us. The same knife she had never let out of her hand since the day I first saw her. It was the clearest offer of trust she had ever given. "If they come back," she said quietly, "I will not let you die for me." I met her eyes. "Then we make sure neither of us dies." That night we did not sit on opposite sides of the fire. We worked together in the dark, stacking extra stones around the hearth to hide the glow, strengthening the shelter walls, cutting a hidden escape path through the thorns behind the cleft. For the first time, Rayla was not preparing to wait for ghosts. She was preparing to protect the life we had begun to share in this narrow gorge. 3 days later, they returned. This time, there were 5 of them. The same sergeant led the group, but now 2 more bounty hunters rode with him, their horses blowing hard from the steep descent. They came down the gorge in a loose line, eyes sweeping the ground like hounds that had caught a fresh scent. I was sharpening arrows by the stream when the first hoofbeats reached me. I gave the 2-note whistle and watched Rayla vanish into the hidden cleft without a sound. I stayed where I was, knife in hand, and waited. They reined in closer than before, almost at the edge of the fire circle. The sergeant's gaze moved over the fresh repairs to the shelter, the new stone ring around the hearth, the second set of footprints pressed into the soft earth beside the drying racks. One of the bounty hunters dismounted and walked straight to a thorn bush near the back of the camp. He reached in and pulled out a small scrap of dark hide, a torn piece of Rayla's old tunic that had caught on the spines weeks ago. He held it up, the green-black color unmistakable even in the dusty light. "This isn't yours," he said. I stood slowly, my heart beat hard against my ribs, but my voice stayed level. "No. It belongs to the person who lives here with me." The sergeant laughed once, a short, ugly sound. "Then hand her over, Hunter. There's silver on an orc female taken alive. More if she's the one they've been looking for." I took 1 step forward, placing myself between them and the cleft where Rayla waited. "No." The word dropped into the gorge like a stone. For a moment, the only sound was the wind moving through the rocks. The sergeant's hand drifted toward the hilt of his sword. One of the bounty hunters loosened the strap on a short crossbow at his saddle. I kept my eyes on the sergeant and spoke clearly so the words would carry to the rocks behind me. "She is family of mine. Anyone who wants to take her will have to go through me first." The gorge went still, even the wind seemed to pause. I felt Rayla's presence behind the stones like a second heartbeat. She had heard every word. She had waited more than half her life for someone, anyone, to call her family. And the only voice that had ever done so was mine. A bounty hunter started to circle left, hand dropping to his knife. I drew and loosed in one motion. The arrow struck the ground between his boots with a sharp thud, quivering, not close enough to wound, but close enough to make the point. "Next one goes higher," I said. The sergeant's face tightened. He looked at the narrow walls of the gorge, at the 5 of them against one man who had just shown he could shoot before they cleared steel, at the fact that any fight here would leave bodies neither side wanted to explain. He spat into the dust. "You've chosen the wrong side, Hunter." I met his eyes. "For the first time in years, I think I've chosen the right one." He stared at me a moment longer, weighing the cost. Then he jerked his chin at the others. They mounted without another word, but the sergeant turned in his saddle before they rode out. "This isn't finished. We'll be back with a writ from the border lord, and when we do, you'll hang beside her." I watched them climb the trail until the dust settled and the sound of hooves faded. Only then did I turn. Rayla stepped out from the cleft. She walked straight to me and stopped an arm's length away. Her yellow eyes were wide, not with fear this time, but with something raw and trembling. She looked at the arrow still standing in the dirt, then back at me. "Family?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. I nodded. "If you want it to be." For a long moment she did not move. Then her shoulders began to shake. She did not sob loudly or fall to her knees. She simply stood there while silent tears cut clean lines down the dust on her cheeks, tears she had probably not allowed herself since the day her clan vanished. "I waited for them," she said at last. "For years. I know. If they never come back, what then?" I reached out slowly and brushed a strand of black hair from her face with the back of my fingers. She did not flinch. "Then you won't have to wait alone anymore." That night, she did something I had never seen her do. She walked to the place where she had kept the tall signal fire burning every evening for more than half her life. She knelt, gathered the last of the dry wood she had saved for her clan, and carried it to our small hearth. One by one, she fed the sticks into the low flames until the signal fire was gone completely. The tall column of smoke that had guided ghosts for so long rose no more. She did not do it because she had forgotten her people. She did it because for the first time since she was 14 years old, she no longer needed to keep a light burning for those who might never return. She had someone who had already chosen to stay. The truth could no longer stay buried. After the riders left, Rayla stood silent for a long time beside the cold hearth where her signal fire had once burned every night. Then she looked north, toward the higher passes where the last horn of her clan had sounded years ago, and said the words I had been waiting to hear. "I need to know what happened to them." We left at first light the next morning. I carried my bow and a light pack. She carried her bone knife and the small wooden box that now held the string of bone beads that had belonged to her mother. Ash walked between us, hooves quiet on the stony ground. We climbed for 3 days through ravines I had never seen, following paths only Rayla remembered from childhood. The wind grew colder, the stones grew sharper. On the evening of the third day, we came to a wide shelf hidden behind a broken cliff face. What remained of the Black Wolf Eye clan's last camp lay scattered across the ground like bones picked clean by time. A circle of stones half buried in lichen, shattered pieces of clay pots, arrowheads with the clan's wolf-tooth marks still visible on the tangs. A child's leather bracelet, stiff with age, caught on a root. Rayla moved among the ruins without speaking. She knelt by the fire pit and brushed away dirt until she found a single blackened shard of pottery. She turned it over in her hands, tracing the faded pattern with one finger. She knew every piece. No bodies. No graves. Only the quiet evidence that her people had packed what they could and tried to run deeper into the mountains. Whether they had been caught or had simply kept going until the world swallowed them, there was no way to tell. They had never come back. Rayla sat on a flat rock with the bracelet in her lap and stared at nothing for a long time. I did not fill the silence with soft lies. I did not tell her everything would be all right. I simply sat a few paces away and let the wind move between us. When the sun began to sink, she stood, walked to the center of the old fire circle, and gently laid the string of bone beads beside the broken pottery. She whispered something in the rough orc tongue I did not understand. Then she turned away from the past and looked at me. "They are gone," she said. Her voice was tired, but it was also clear. "They have been gone for a long time." We walked back down to our gorge in silence. The journey felt lighter, as if some invisible weight had finally been set down. When we reached the camp, we did not rest. We began to build. I cut straight saplings from the thin stand of trees lower in the gorge and dragged them back on Ash's back. Rayla mixed clay and grass into thick plaster and showed me how to pack it between the logs so the walls would hold against the mountain wind. We raised a second room beside the old shelter, small but solid, with a window that faced the rising sun. We built a proper stone hearth that would not fill the gorge with smoke. We dug a root cellar into the bank of the stream and lined it with flat stones. We wove a low fence of thorn branches around the spring so the few wild goats that sometimes wandered down could be kept for milk and meat. Each log we set, each stone we placed, felt like a promise we were making to the future instead of the past. Weeks later, the sergeant returned, this time with a thin scribe from the border lord's household and a scroll of official parchment. They found us working side by side on the new roof. The scribe's eyes widened when he saw Rayla standing openly in the sunlight, green-skinned and unafraid. The sergeant started to speak, but I cut him off. I handed him the papers I had prepared during the quiet days after our journey north, a hunter's charter, a simple deed of occupancy for the gorge granted by the last village I had traded with, and a new document I had written myself naming Rayla as my partner in the holding. The scribe read it slowly, lips moving, then looked up at me with mild surprise. "If the papers are in order," he said, "and the land is claimed, then she is not a stray. She is household." The sergeant's face twisted, but he had no writ strong enough to override a sealed document from the Lord's own clerk. They left without taking her. That night the gorge felt different. The air was still cold, but the walls of our new house held the warmth of the fire. Rayla sat across from me at the low table we had built together. The bone knife lay on the wood between us, no longer a weapon she kept ready at every moment. She looked at me for a long time. "Why me?" she asked. "Of all the places you could have ridden past, why did you stop for the smoke of a stranger?" I reached across the table and laid my hand palm up between us. After a moment she placed hers over mine, the rough green skin warm against my calloused fingers. "Because you kept this place alive when the whole world had forgotten it," I said. "Because you refused to die even when every reason told you to, and because when I am here with you, I no longer feel the need to keep walking away from everything." She closed her fingers around mine in the orc way, a grip that meant acceptance, not ownership. Then she spoke the words I had never expected to hear from her. "Then stay." "I already have," I answered. Winter came slowly to the gorge. Snow dusted the high ridges first, then settled lower until the stones wore white cloaks. For the first time in more than half her life, Rayla did not spend the long evenings standing on the overlook, staring north into the passes where her clan had vanished. She still kept the string of bone beads in the small wooden box beside our bed. She still spoke their names, sometimes under her breath when the wind howled. But every morning she checked the snares, fed the small herd of goats, called my name when she needed another armful of wood, and smiled, a small, careful smile that grew easier with each passing day. The girl who had waited alone for years had finally stopped waiting. She had begun to live. The story had started with a lone orc girl who kept a signal fire burning for a people who never returned. She had guarded a scrap of shelter and a handful of memories through hunger and cold and endless silence. Then a drifting hunter followed a thin thread of smoke into the gorge and chose, against every rule of the world outside, not to walk away. Walk. I could not bring her clan back. I could not erase the years she had spent alone, but I could stay. And sometimes, for someone who has been left behind longer than she can remember, staying is the only miracle she needs. In the narrow gorge that had once been nothing but a place of waiting, we built a home, not to replace what was lost, but to prove that even after many years of being forgotten, a person can still be found.